Forget oil, potash, and other resources. The resource that is about to change everything is one most people never connect to Canada at all. While Washington was distracted by tariffs and trade wars, Canada was sitting on a nuclear advantage so complete that no other Western country can replicate it in less than a generation. The world just figured out what Canada built, and the scramble to get access to it has already begun. Just recently, one of the world's biggest technology companies signed the largest corporate nuclear energy purchase in American history. And buried inside that deal was a supply chain that pointed to one country. Not Russia, not China, not France, Canada. A country that made one decision in a government lab in the 1950s that looked like settling for second best and just turned out to be the most important strategic choice any Western nation made in the entire 20th century. The default story about Canada in the global economy is familiar. Raw materials, stable governance, the reliable partner that the United States leans on when it needs lumber, oil, potash, or talent. That story is not wrong. It is just radically incomplete. Because alongside the resource economy, since the 1960s, Canada was making a different kind of bet entirely, building a nuclear technology ecosystem so specialized and so deep that no other Western country could replicate it in less than a generation. And that bet is now paying off at exactly the moment the world needs it most. The story starts with the CANDU reactor, Canada Deuterium Uranium. Designed at a government lab in Chalk River, Ontario in the 1950s, built around heavy water and natural uranium, rather than the enriched fuel that every other reactor design requires. Most reactor types, including the small modular reactors that Meta, Microsoft, and Google are now racing to secure for their AI infrastructure, require enriched uranium. Natural uranium, as it comes out of the ground, is approximately 99% U-238, a form that does not split easily enough to sustain a chain reaction on its own. The fissile portion, U-235, makes up less than 1%. Enrichment is the industrial process that concentrates that fraction until the fuel is reactive enough to power a conventional reactor. It requires specialized centrifuge facilities that are expensive, technically demanding, and currently controlled by Russia, China, and France. Every Western nuclear buyer dependent on enriched fuel is dependent on a supply chain that runs through at least one of those three countries. Canada looked at that constraint in the 1950s and designed around it. The CANDU runs on natural uranium, no enrichment required. At the time, this was partly practical. Canada had uranium coming out of Saskatchewan, but no enrichment infrastructure, and building it would have been expensive. The choice was framed, even internally, as a workaround. That workaround has now become Canada's single most important strategic asset. When Russia invaded Ukraine and the West needed to reduce dependence on Russian fuel supply chains, every country that had built around enriched uranium faced a bottleneck. Canada did not. The Canadian supply chain runs entirely within Canadian territory. Uranium from Saskatchewan going directly into CANDU reactors without foreign enrichment at any point in the chain. The delivery record is the second pillar of Canada's nuclear advantage, and it is the one that has made the global industry stop and pay serious attention. The Western nuclear construction record over the past 20 years is a consistent story of failure. Vogtle in Georgia came in $17 billion over budget and years late. Flamanville in France is a decade behind schedule. Olkiluoto in Finland took 18 years to complete a project originally planned for 4. Every major new nuclear build in the Western world during this period produced the same outcome: ballooning costs, missed deadlines, and investor confidence eroded to the point where private capital effectively stopped participating. Then, Canada delivered 2 projects in the same month. The Darlington refurbishment, the world's largest nuclear refurbishment, a decade-long overhaul of 4 reactor units at a budget of $12.8 billion, completed its construction phase 4 months ahead of schedule and $150 million under budget on February 2nd, 2026. 2 weeks later, Bruce Power finished its Unit 3 major component replacement, also on budget, also ahead of schedule. Both projects delivered what every Western nuclear project of the previous 20 years had promised and failed to deliver. The industry that desperately needed to see proof that complex nuclear projects could be executed reliably in the West got that proof from Ontario, twice in the same month. That demonstration is itself a form of currency. It is the foundation on which Canada's position in the global SMR race is built. In 2025, construction began on the Darlington New Nuclear Project, the first grid-scale small modular reactor in the G7. The GE Hitachi BWRX 300 design, factory built at 300 megawatts, designed for replication at scale, expected online by 2030. If it performs, it becomes the reference project for every SMR deployment that follows in the Western world. The Tennessee Valley Authority has invested $400 million in the same design but remains in permit review and will not have a comparable facility operational until 2033 at earliest. Canada is not at the beginning of this race. It is years ahead. The commercial momentum is already moving into new markets at scale. In March 2026, Prime Minister Carney flew to India and signed a $2.6 billion uranium supply deal, Cameco, delivering 22 million pounds to India's Department of Atomic Energy between 2027 and 2035, nearly 10 times the value of the previous agreement. The visit was explicitly framed as part of Canada's strategy to reduce dependence on the American market. In September 2025, Cameco signed a separate long-term uranium supply agreement with Slovakia through 2036. While American tariffs are straining nearly every other dimension of Canadian trade, nuclear is moving in the opposite direction into new markets at scale and on Canadian terms. Once a country commits to a 9-year supply agreement, the relationship stops being transactional. It becomes structural. And structural relationships compound. The one unresolved question involves enrichment. The Darlington SMR project runs on low-enriched uranium at approximately 5% U-235. Canada's current plan is to extract uranium from Saskatchewan, enrich it in New Mexico and through Orano in France, and bring it back as fuel. A 2022 federal government commissioned report by engineering firm Hatch recommended Canada consider building domestic enrichment capacity. A country that mines the uranium, builds the reactors, holds the only credible Western delivery record, is constructing the G7's first commercial SMR, and is signing billion-dollar supply agreements with India and Europe, probably should not be sending its fuel to New Mexico for enrichment before using it at home. Canada has the uranium, the technology, the delivery record, and contracts expanding into every market where energy security has become a strategic priority. The window where that head start is decisive is finite. And the world is paying attention in ways it was not 12 months ago.